This is a conversation with Michael Skelly, one of my dear friends and pioneers of the low-code space. More than 4 years ago, Michael and his co-founder Sam launched what is now called Stacker, one of the best front-end builders for Airtable and a whole bunch of databases, of course. And I wanted to talk to him to pick his brain about the future of the industry and how AI is disrupting the space. So without any further ado, let's get started. So look, I want to get started. I'm conscious of your time. And I want to start off kind of like easy. Let's talk about Stacker now. What is Stacker for the uninitiated?
Yeah, so Stacker is a no-code application platform. And I think obviously many flavors of those. We are really, really specifically focused on people building apps to power their business's operation. And these are typically data-powered apps. They're built by people who have the problems that they're trying to solve.
Okay. So what about the history? What prompted you to even see this as a thing to build? Because there's so many different things you could build in this world. And you guys started up, I think it was called Air Portal 4 years ago, maybe more, actually 5. So what prompted you to do that? To say, okay, we actually want to build a place where people can build business applications?
I tell people that we've pivoted like 4 times, 90 degrees each time, and we're back to facing the way that we started. Because actually Air Portal was probably our kind of like third pivot before the final one.
Yeah,
the story
take
started
me through the first pivots.
way back. When we originally started, the idea came from me and my co-founder Sam. I'd worked in a kind of very middle-of-the-road, mediocre, medium-sized finance company. And there we worked in the IT department. And our job was basically to get people the software they needed. And there kind of isn't a big market of middle-of-the-road, mediocre asset management finance companies. So there was never software that perfectly fit what they wanted. So they'd come to us to build it. But we were just terrible at building the software for them. We'd always ship it late, and when we shipped it, it was probably not what they asked for. And when we eventually got the act together and eventually got it across the line and got it to the spec that they asked, that didn't matter because everything they needed had changed anyway in the preceding 9 months or something. So, and we kept on doing this, and we'd ship it to them, and we'd finally say, great, it's done. They're like, oh, well, now I've got it. I know exactly what I need to change. We say, great, no problem, back of the queue. We've got so many other people who are now waiting for this terrible software we'll be delivering. And it seemed crazy. It seemed absolutely broken because these people really, really did understand what they needed. And Sam and I started finding ways to go faster and faster on that, using things like the Salesforce platform so that we could build and show them what we were building live. And eventually we got to the point where they could come to our desks and we would be kind of making the software as they described what they wanted. And so even though we were hands on the keyboard and mouse, they were kind of the ones building the software. And we were like, okay, cool. If we could only do that bit, but without Michael and Sam hands on the keyboard, then we've got some magic.
All right. So that was the first pivot?
That was the first incarnation of Stacker. And in some ways, it was very, very similar to what we are doing right now. But then along the way, we took the kind of meandering paths that startups take. We tried to do this kind of like internal business software, started selling it to startups. Startups started telling us, and these are very early stage startups, well, I mean, it's all great to have like this really slick internal thing, but actually I care about my product. So we're like, okay, cool. The valuable thing is the product. So we'll help you make the product. We found that we could make a really, really flexible SaaS product builder, but actually these companies were terrible because they either were going to fail, as most startups do, in which case they wouldn't pay us, or they'd succeed, in which case they would move off onto their own tech stack. They'd hire a bunch of engineers.
So they would use you like a little stepping stone.
Exactly. So whichever way our customers went, they wouldn't continue working with us, even though what we built was great. And in some ways, the better we built it, the faster they moved on to something else.
Why? That is so counterintuitive.
I think lots of people have this kind of, we need an MVP, but then we're going to prove it out with the MVP and then build it properly. Back then, no code wasn't even a thing.
No.
That wasn't even a word that anyone had heard of. And so we were like really having to convince people that it was possible that they could build these things without software. But still, that was only for them enough to kind of get them across the MVP line. After that, the tried and tested path of hiring a bunch of engineers and building was always the plan.
What year was that? Like, roughly, what was the year of no code was not even heard of?
Like 2017?
2017. Okay. Interesting. So that was like pivot number 2, Air Portal number 3, right?
Yeah, so Air Portal, we got to looking at people who were a bit further on in their journey. They actually had a running business. And we thought, well, people who have a running business already have data, and they still have the problems that we can see existing, that they have no way to make these software interfaces on top of the data. And we looked around at different data sources that we could use. We looked at Salesforce, we had the history in there. We looked at SQL databases, but that was not kind of the right persona. We never wanted to build for engineers to build faster. We do think the joy from this is getting people who wouldn't have built it at all, who would have just sat sadly and lived with what they had. And Airtable seemed to be a fantastic tool that was emerging at the time, where these kind of non-technical people were doing basically building databases.
What was it like building Air Portal? What was the original sketches based upon? Like, what was the idea? Did you have a vision of, okay, it's Airtable today, but we want to turn this into the future of work?
So I think this came back to the original idea that we'd had of building this kind of business-focused internal system. And the idea with that was always that you wouldn't be kind of dragging and dropping loads of tiny bits that you created in your data schema, and the app just existed. And we'd kind of gone a long way into the drag and drop, add a button, wire the button up to the text box kind of thing. So with this one, we knew that we wanted to get that magic back of, there's your schema, and we'll automatically create a working app based on that schema. Just from years of having people really struggling even to create a basic login form. Like, people shouldn't be creating login forms themselves. They shouldn't be creating list views themselves. They shouldn't be creating new record pages themselves. None of this. So we knew from the start that, yes, what we wanted is to have a system which is a great system out of the box, and it's shaped by the shape of the data.
I want to pivot to a slightly different direction, but I think kind of like on the same wavelength. On a personal level, what has the journey been like from, especially, I think, post Air Portal, right when you were, a startup in your own right, up until when you launched the next version? I felt like it was Air Portal rebranded into Stacker, and Stacker still stands. And you launched Stacker, to me, 2.0, that complete overhaul of what Air Portal was at the time. What's the journey like as a CEO, as a co-founder, of building all of that out? And what do you feel like your, if not top 1 most significant lesson, but maybe let's broaden it to like top 3 most significant lessons that you feel like you've gained from Air Portal, rebranding to Stacker, and recent deal, and like now?
I think the most surprising thing is that we start off doing a thing, and Air Portal is a great example. We made this as a way to create customer portals on top of your Airtable data. And at some point, we were adding features that were making that better and better. And a subset of customers were kind of just like not interested in these things that made it easier to engage with the customers. Once we started talking more deeply with them, it turned out that they actually weren't using this customer portal with their customers. They weren't using it with partners or vendors or anyone. They were using it internally. We were like, oh, wow, that's weird, because you guys have Airtable, so presumably you don't need this, so why are you doing this? And it turned out that they did. At that point, I think there were kind of 3 different paths we could take. One is we could say, not interested in you, we're going to keep on doing the portals, and we're just going to get better and better at doing the portals. Another option would be to say, okay, we're going to do just these internal use cases. That's really interesting. Loads of businesses need internal tooling. Shall we do that instead? But the more that we looked at it, and the more that we spoke to people, it became clear that it wasn't just an internal tool or just a portal that was interesting. For them, it was, having the thing that covered both sides and so many times as like a great, we have a CRM and the customers in the CRM can log in.
Yeah.
We've got a vendor management system and the vendors can.
Exactly.
And so that, I think, gave us this lot of internal change where we needed to take this product that was set up to do one thing and try to make it do two things.
How hard was that?
I'll say that is generally a terrible idea and it's very hard. And I think the reason is because something that does one thing well is usually better than something that can do multiple things. And I think a mistake probably that we made is rather than trying to have two different areas of the product, one which does internal, one which does portals, we've tried to keep the tool so far kind of quite flexible and having to blur the line between the two. And I think that came from us finding out that the line is quite blurry. You might think, well, okay, if they're outside your organization, they are on the portal, if not, they're internal. But what about contractors? What about team salespeople that you don't know personally, but still get your deal flow? So I think we've tried to keep this to be something up to the interpretation of the people who use it, because we don't know everything about your business. This is kind of why you're using no-code software rather than some off-the-shelf thing, because there isn't someone who knows enough about your business and it isn't a standard enough thing that we can make the perfect solution. So we give you the tools to make your perfect solution.
So the lesson there, one of the three, I'm still expecting two. So the lesson, I guess, there is to listen to clients as early as possible.
Yeah, and I think be willing to change based on what we're hearing rather than what our expectations were. So our expectations were like, oh great, portals are, that's a thing. Great, we're Air Portal, it's even in the name.
Give me two more. What are two other very significant lessons that you've learned in that journey? Let's take the team, for instance. What significant lessons have you drawn as a startup who has gone from the team of two to multiple engineers, venture capital backed? What's the significant lesson that you can teach anybody who's seeing this about team building?
The answer is unfortunately not a gem of wisdom that you'll have never heard before, but it rings true far more deeply than any other thing. And that is that people make such a difference, and not just the people in isolation, but the people working with each other and finding that dynamic of people who are smart, yes, but also deeply passionate about what you're doing. And I think also great people. Like, we're going to be on a journey together for a long time, and getting those into a setup where they have the autonomy and mastery and trust to be able to go and do the thing.
Do you believe in the power of the individual, or do you feel like strength is in numbers?
I think in the short term, an individual can do incredible stuff. And really, like, when you first start out building a product on your own, you can actually make this incredible progress because there is no communication overhead between the marketing team, the sales team, the UX team, the whatever. You are a one-person team, and that continues. Sometimes when we have a thing that we need to do, we'll just say, great, someone, off you go. You go take that and run with it a long, long way, and then we'll all catch up and kind of huddle around it. That works in the short run. I think it works for things up to a certain complexity. But after that, it really becomes how well teams integrated, how shared the knowledge is. And at that point, having people who are kind of the hero, who, this is my area, like, you've got any changes that I'll do them, don't worry. That is something that really, really slows you down. So we hire people who are really, really low ego, which unfortunately rules out a load of fantastic engineers. But those engineers, even though they could be excellent heroes, they could run on their own, it doesn't give a long-term benefit to the overall engineering team.
The third significant thing that I would like you to tell me is about leadership. Any significant lessons in leadership specifically that stand out in the last 5-6 years?
We, I think, internally have a cultural value of radical transparency. That has been something that has come from previous experiences that I've been in of startups where the culture wasn't great. There was lots of uncertainty, fear, doubt, and I saw how harmful that was. And so we adopted this mainly just off the back of seeing what the flip side was like. What has been really, really interesting for me is how often that is a really difficult thing to hold. There are times where you say, okay, well, this must be a thing where it makes sense not to do that for XYZ reasons. You can always rationalize the reasons why we don't need to be transparent at this point. There are times when we have kind of gone along with that, sometimes because it's kind of like startup doctrine that, oh yeah, the right thing to do is to not tell people about these kind of things until they're set or until whatever. And I think again and again, we've found that they are the times, but again and again, we found that those are the things where we've made a mistake and that we really regret not just being upfront with the things we know immediately. So that I think has now just become baked into how we think of leading, which is give people open access to the information. But along with that, you have to give the context, and you have to, sometimes we have documents that say, hey, if you want to open this document, please reach out to us because we can give you the context of it. You just read this document on their own, you're not going to get the right picture. But as long as you trust people to do that, and they trust you to be telling them information that's important when it's necessary to do so, then I think you really can benefit so much from not having people say, oh, can I find this out? Could I look at this? Like, no, great, just go and find it. And if you've got any questions, ask someone.
That was amazing. I actually learned a few things for me. But let's kind of zoom out a bit and let's see where we are in 2024. What do you feel like the landscape is right now with competition, with AI, and all of these, and this explosion in low code as well, as compared to 2017? And where do you feel like it's going?
So I kind of feel like the no-code revolution was partly an unbundling of loads of stuff that had already existed. Tools like QuickBase that have been around, I think, since the 90s, spin out of Intuit, you could build a flexible schema. You could create user interfaces on top of it. They have point-and-click automations already. But because it was like a whole package, they never really got any of those things to be like really, really slick. And I think part of the no-code revolution was those things getting unbundled. So like Airtable unbundled the data layer, Zapier unbundled the automation layer, we unbundled the interface layer. They got unbundled and then worked on by independent teams and just got made really, really great. And I think, worked out pretty quickly what was a really fantastic version of each of those things. Right now, I think the opposite process is happening. And I think we're generally rebundling. Right now, we are in the process of launching our full data platform that is kind of Airtable equivalent. We've got our automations layer, and we've still got our UI layer. Glide has the same kind of things. That they've got their Glide tables, they've got automations, they've still got the interfaces. And I think
But I mean, Zapier has their own tables right now.
Exactly. And I think we're seeing those things kind of all come back in all of the vendors. Airtable as well have also automations and also an interface.
How's your relationship with Airtable? Because back in the days of Airportal, it was like Airtable was this fairy godmother that just provided us with database layer, and they had no ambitions of creating any kind of interface. Now, do you feel like you're in competition with them? Do you feel like Airtable is now a competitor and therefore we have to watch out? Or do you still see them as a very strategic partner?
So, we are definitely in competition with them. As in some ways, Zapier is now in competition with them. I think we are probably more directly, but still, I think we each major in different areas and then minor in others. And I think in general, that is what is happening in the no-code tool landscape right now. But the
this
actual
bundling where everybody is making their own version of everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And then what happens there is not that it's a kind of feature race anymore, because everyone basically gets the same kind of features. What it becomes is a kind of methodology. How have you built them? How does your product work? And a link to that, what is it for? Like, under what circumstances does it make more sense to go with an Airtable than it does with Stacker or than a Zapier table? And I think what we'll start to see is more and more kind of niching down of the kind of areas that best suits each of the tools, because I think those that don't will end up finding that, well, even though you were really, really good for, I don't know, education, actually there'll be somewhere else that has really focused on education as one of its core use cases and is now a bit more targeted. And I think we're seeing platforms niching down kind of from the top down, where they were very broad, and then they're finding the kind of the things that work for them. I think we're also seeing SaaS tools, no coding up, and we're getting more used to be kind of classic SaaS platforms, adding flexible schema, flexible interface, and automations to also be viable a no-code platform.
You know what? This is probably one of the best, in a nutshell, explanations of that I've heard in recent times from industry leaders that I speak to, be they clients or be they in the same sort of startup, of what's happening to the low-code like industry in general, and how everybody is, like you very perfectly described it, kind of like opened up, and now everybody's like sharpening up and making sure that they serve specific verticals or that they target better specific verticals. And also they're trying to give more value for that subscription payment by introducing, if I'm an automation platform, hey, you now have tables. You only need tables to store a little bit of data. You don't need to have an Airtable subscription or something. Just like Zapier is doing. They're also launching interfaces, which is interesting to see how that's going to go. I'm conscious a little bit of time, and my last question is legacy. You, like in our personal conversations, you share with me that you're planning to launch a huge update on Stacker this year, hopefully. But my question is, what is your vision for Stacker's legacy 5 to 10 years from now? What would the dream be?
To me, it's always been super, super clear that there is a huge number of people all across the world who need software. And we're like, I don't know how far into the software revolution. Maybe that started in the 90s. Maybe it started with the kind of Salesforce era. We're at least kind of like 25 years in the software revolution. But still, most people in businesses at least are doing things by hand, by email, spreadsheets. And most companies just don't have a system that they run on. It's all patched together. There's a million SaaS tools. So I think like we would really, really love to at least have precipitated and ideally be directly the ones who are doing this, having everyone being powered by software and not doing things in the old-fashioned way.
Do you, and this is kind of like a branch off into that 5 to 10 year timeline, do you feel like the future building of software is going to be governed by AI? In other words, I can just explain or feed an AI agent details about my business, from just explaining to it what I do to giving it like invoice templates and all the stuff that goes on in terms of operations, and have it build the Air Portal iteration, like the Pivot 1, that custom dream that used to take 9 months. Is there a future where you won't need to either level up personally or hire a developer in order to build the perfect Stacker app?
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of interesting consequences with AI, and I'm going to put aside AI workflows where you're using the AI in the business work. There's loads of interesting stuff there as well. But I think even just in creating these applications and creating multiple applications that become like a system, yes, I think it's already absolutely transforming things. And there's kind of 2 layers to it. One is just the mechanical layer. There's, okay, I want to do this, and I don't want to have to go and click. I don't need to know how to do it in the platform. The platform knows how to do it in the platform. I just say what I want. Maybe I don't say what I want. Maybe I just, as you say, give it all my invoices or my spreadsheets, and it just kind of like figures it out from that. So that's the first layer. And the good thing about that is that it allows the platforms like us to get a lot more in depth with what people can do. Right now, we kind of toe this careful line between, we can't make the stuff you make exactly like off-the-shelf software because that's too fiddly, too complex for people to hold in their heads. So using AI, we can allow it to know what a great user profile page looks like really to the nth degree and give it a lot of controls so that the range of outputs can be broader. At the same time, we need to hold it so that people who get that output can at least understand what it is. They can audit it and say, yes, that is what I wanted. You have faithfully reproduced my request into some output. Just like right now, you wouldn't ask the AI for an email to send to a client and not look at that email. You read the email to say, yeah, is that a good email? And same is going to be true for this. People need to be able to look at it and at least understand what's going on behind the scenes, even if they couldn't have created that themselves from scratch. So that's the first level. But the second level that I think we see a lot with customers, especially when they build a couple of Stack Wraps, they're like, great, I know how the mechanics work. What they come to us a lot with is actually not asking how to do something with Stacker, but just how to think about the process in a systematic way. And that kind of consultative approach, I think, is where AI can be really, really interesting. Where you don't
short
say...
term, I think it can give that.
Absolutely.
We don't have to wait 5 years, because I feel like the mechanical part, that is almost like, to me, it feels almost like a space race brewing between a lot of platforms where, the great vision is you just talk to AI and you get the most amazing app with 16 different user roles, with each having their own permissions and, hundreds of different layouts and whatnot. Whereas I feel like that will take an incredible amount of time to build, because it's also the developers on your team who need to figure out how to get the prompt to translate into code. The second part, I feel like it's so easy. It's almost like we already have this with tooltips. Like when you just sign up for a platform, you get these tooltips that kind of tell you where to click and what to do. It almost feels like, okay, why not get AI to kind of like act as your consultant in the moment?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that becomes not just a set something up for the first time, but also continue to reason about it as processes change. And I think probably in a very perverse way, even though we have AIs that can now do a lot more of the fiddly work, we'll probably want some higher level building blocks for people to have the AI suggest to them, great, this is going to be a pipeline process. And, there's loads of extra configuration I can do under that once I ask you some questions, but you're going to reason about it as a pipeline process with these stages, so that when we come to change it, we don't have to talk now with all these little tiny changes that I've made down to the app configuration. We're going to talk at the high level, and then you're going to be able to understand that. And then I'll make the appropriate changes at the low level that fit with that model. So I think there's some really, really exciting stuff that comes from this kind of, think of the AI in our context as something that understands both the outside world and business processes really well, and understands computer systems really well. So we've got this like perfect consultant who can really ask those questions.
I mean, I'm looking forward to it. And I mean, as we're kind of closing up, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. What are the things that you are most excited about being added once AI becomes possible kind of to its full extent across all the different app platforms?
To me, I feel like we have two different types of users. Users who, I mean, they're technically one type, but I see them as two types. First type is a person who's already built a database on something, Airtable, a Stacker table, and they need to build a front end on top. There is a second kind of user who is a little bit further back. They're probably using Excel or something like this. I would be excited for them to be able to use AI to really easily create schemas for the database, because that is the alpha and omega of a successful app. I have been using this already. A lot of the times when I have a project in mind, I will consult AI to create the schema for me. I've been building schemas by hand, and when I say by hand, I literally mean by hand. I have an iPad and I actually used to draw them because I hated the experience of using something like Lucidchart to create the ERD with like clicks. And I feel like it's an artistic thing where when you're creating a schema, you want to be creative, you want to look 4 or 5 years down the line and kind of predict where that business is going to go. So using a pen and pencil for me was the name of the game. I love using my hand to draw things out and visualize them. It helps. Nowadays,
I think it triggers a different side of your brain to engage.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
no surprise you get to be more creative during that.
Exactly. But you know what I've noticed lately? Like I said, when I'm thinking of a project, I actually consult AI first. And the results are, I would dare to say, 98% of the time, bang on. The schema that it generates is 98% there. I have to challenge it, of course, because I probably know more details about how this project will evolve. But the generation of schema, I can't wait for it to be an incredibly easy thing on Stacker tables. And you might argue that, well, people already have their data inside of Excel. That doesn't mean that it's relationally architectured.
No, in fact, the opposite. Excel really trains you to denormalize data, to put it all in one big sheet, because it's such a pain doing the lookups and stuff. So yeah, I think it's a real fun brainwashing process to get people think, all right, we're going to normalize this, we're going to split this into tables. Don't worry, you're not going to have to be copying. The system does all the copying. Forget all the horrible Excel strife. Just split things up, go small, and feel the magic of it.
The beauty is that recently I did a video on that you can feed a broken, messy data spreadsheet into ChatGPT and it will do it. It will take a look at that CSV or whatever it is, and it will not only construct it, or rather normalize it into a relational database, be that in Excel, but it will also take the data that's in there and put it in the right table. So I can't wait for something like that to exist as almost like a first step to make that initial jump of a user from, ooh, I just found Stacker, I've given it a spreadsheet, and suddenly it has done all the work of splitting it out, creating a DB correctly, with maybe a few minor prompts and tweaks, we'll see. But as soon as it's done that, it has also then created some of the things that it does already. In other words, list views, forms, detail views, that sort of thing. So, because I also feel like there's a lot of people leaving the platforms too quickly, just because they have this promised land from the homepage of the website, and they sign up, they load up their data, and because it's not structured, they kind of feel like, ooh, okay, there's work to be done. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have time for this. Back to Excel. So that's one thing that I can't.
Yeah, I think our kind of magic promise with when we first launched Airportal was get a working app in the first 30 seconds. And I agree. I think people who have their data in a different kind of format and they haven't gone through the process of making it all neat. Maybe it's in 1,000 different Google Sheets or Excel documents. Maybe it's in one, but each customer is a different tab. And I mean, even though I know what to do, if you gave that to me and said, please make this, I'd say, oh no, I don't think I want to. I think I have mismatched columns. There's so much work just to get to the point where you're ready to start. So yeah, I definitely think being able to do something like that. And that is not just for the first experience, but I think our vision is that every time you add some new data into the system, you start using a different SaaS tool, just connect it in, the system will figure out how it relates to all the other parts of your ecosystem, link it in and just appear in the right place in the system.
That also is amazing. Not just loading up data from CSV or an Excel and getting AI to magically create the structure and add the data and relate it, but also when you throw Stripe in the mix, an API schema that it already knows basically, so that it can kind of assimilate, you know what, this customer table that I created is actually that customer ID and Stripe, therefore I need to relate these two things kind of like
exactly.
automatic.
That's kind of what we're pushing towards.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an amazing convo. I can't wait for what Stacker has got ready or preparing for this year. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Michael. Cheers.